If you're walking on the beach in Kitty Hawk, you could be just a couple hundred yards away from what we could call the Christmas Day disaster wreck. Hi, I'm Marc Corbett. I'm an Outer Banks shipwreck historian and diver. It's been my goal to dive and document every wreck on the Outer Banks to preserve these shipwrecks in the public memory, because they're not going to last forever. So I want to document them as they are now for future generations to be able to look at. The significance of the Winks wreck, the SS Mountaineer, built in 1835, is the oldest steam vessel you can dive on the North Carolina coast. It's older than just about every other steam vessel except for one that is called the SS Pocahontas. They called the wreck the Winks wreck because it's just down the street from the old Winks in Kitty Hawk. The wreck sits out in front of the house just to the south of Luke Street on the beach. And it's not much of a swim out to the wreck. It's probably 100 yards at most. In the days before we had modern navigation systems, vessels relied on things like sextants. To be able to navigate, they needed to be able to see the sun and the stars. When they got into these storms, sometimes they might not be able to see anything to navigate by for days. It became really dangerous sailing up the coast, because at any given point, you could misnavigate and end up in shallow water, and sometimes you'd end up making a bad judgment call, and the next thing you know, you're aground. And that's how a lot of these shipwrecks got here, and that's probably how the Mountaineer ended up on the beach. The Mountaineer was sort of a revolutionary vessel for her time. She was what was called a steam packet. Now, in the days before steam navigation, when you were relying on the wind, vessels took a long time or a short time to get where they were supposed to go, depending on which way the wind was blowing. Sometimes the wind didn't blow at all. With steam engines, it became possible for a vessel to leave a certain port, reach another port at a certain time that was pretty predictable. So Mountaineer was a fairly new concept in the 1830s when she started plying the seas, mostly around the British Isles. The Mountaineer sank in 1842 on the Straits of Menai in England, and she was actually one of the first vessels ever raised off the bottom. So the first diver to dive on the Mountaineer happened in 1842 when she was raised from sinking. The Mountaineer was then fixed up, she was sold, and continued doing steam packet work. By that time, she was a little bit beat up. She wasn't the first-class passenger vessel that she had once been. On Mountaineer's last voyage, I don't know specifically what she was carrying, but it wasn't much. She had been sold and was getting ready to be used as a tugboat in New Brunswick. They took a rather circuitous route from England to where they ended up. The Mountaineer appears to have left from Liverpool, England, traveled to Nassau, Bahamas, and ended up on the beach in Kitty Hawk on the 25th of December, 1852. Somewhere along the line, the steam engine broke down, and it was taken apart, and I believe the paddle wheels were put on the decks. They were trying to get to Norfolk, Virginia, where they were going to try to get the steam engine fixed, is what they had said. Now, when I first started diving on the site known as the Winks Wreck in Kitty Hawk, I didn't know what it was. It was told to me that it was a barge. But when I got on the wreck site and started looking at the machinery there, what I saw did not look like a barge at all. It looked like a pair of steam engines. When I started trying to figure out what it was, I went through the lists of ships that have sunk in the area, and there were a number of different possibilities for what it could have been, but really there were only 2 steamships that wrecked in the area. One of them, the engines had been salvaged, so I already had a good idea it was this vessel called the Mountaineer, because that was the only one in the area that hadn't been salvaged. I started looking up information, and I went to the Outer Banks History Center, which is a really good local resource, and I pulled up some old newspaper articles and found the article on the Mountaineer detailing when it wrecked in 1852 and that Captain Stickney was headed to New Brunswick. So I decided, well, what does a British steam engine look like from the 1850s? And what it turns out it would be an engine called a side lever engine. When I looked up what an early British steam engine looked like, I got a picture of a side lever engine, and it about knocked me out of my seat because the picture looked almost exactly like the steam engines on the site. It says in the article that the machinery was detached, and we've got evidence of that on the site. Between having the correct steam engine, the correct kind of boiler, and the machinery being detached, it's almost certain that this is the Mountaineer. After I made what I believe is the identification of the vessel, a fellow from East Carolina University, Lucas Simons, published a paper in the Journal of the North Carolina Maritime History Council on the Mountaineer, and basically agrees with everything that I had found. And he did quite a bit of research into her origins in England. It's pretty much the only British steamer that wrecked anywhere near that area, especially with that old of a steam engine. The thing that's probably the most interesting about the Mountaineer is it's a time capsule of what an early British steam vessel looks like. It's very old. It just sits right offshore. So there's this history that's being preserved by the sand in Kitty Hawk that you'd have a hard time finding if you were just to try to go out and look for something like that. It's kind of special.